After 3 months out of the game, I'm back with 2 videos in one day. I'm just different. Alright? Today, got a little bit of a story time. So, I had a client bring in the idea that he was playing, Shadow of the Colossus, the video game. I like video games, so I was telling him I've already tried looking into it. Like, I've already wanted to play the game. It looks amazing. I don't have a PS4, so I'm not going to play it. So he was telling me a little bit about the game, and we were just chit-chatting. What he didn't expect was for us to make the whole hour about Shadow of the Colossus. We did this because there was a lot of lessons to be had in the game. In the game's narrative, there's a lot of lessons to be had. So I had him explain it first to me, so that I could explain it back as a therapist. And sorry, my dogs are going crazy. 1 second. Okay, they're no longer with us. I put them both down. So, anyways, he was explaining to me, and I had we kind of made a framework where Dorman, the god that used to be worshipped but is now seen as like an evil entity, we kind of put him at this line. We drew a line. We put him here. This line was considered safety, and I'll explain this as I do my analysis. We had this other line where it's like a transcendence line, finding meaning, and that was, I think his name was Nimrod. Is Nimrod? Yeah, I think Nimrod's the main character. So his name was Nimrod. No, shit. Wanderer. Okay, so we had Wanderer at top, and then Dorman at the bottom. Okay, I'm remembering the stories better. Okay. So, anyways, that's kind of where we left the session. We had a lot of fun in creating this narrative and creating this structure. And as you will see, a lot of times I might make a video purely about this, but a lot of time with clients or with neurosis and with mental disorders in general, you see it actually stems from fear. There's some type of benefit. This is an Adlerian or William Glasser perspective. There's some type of benefit to the disorder. So let's say, for example, you're socially anxious. I might ask a client, what's the benefit of that? The benefit is that they don't have to take a risk to put themselves out there to be vulnerable, for example. So with this client, what we're talking about is avoiding life's deeper meanings. And I'm being as broad as possible for completely confidential reasons. So just avoiding life's deeper meanings because it's scary. And that's kind of what Dorman is all about, as we'll see. So that's that story. Okay. So that week he wanted to send me a lore video. I let him send me a lore video. I watched it over. It was like an hour lore video about Shadow of the Colossus. And I got a much deeper understanding of it. Through watching that video, I just wrote down some random notes that I thought were interesting to bring into session. And now I'm going to share those notes to you guys. And that'll be the whole video, is me sharing my notes about a lore video about Shadow of the Colossus as it pertains therapeutically to meaning. As you can see, I was kidding. My dogs are not put down. Ivy, you safe? You feeling good? Yeah, they're hyper still. Okay, I'm going to put them down now. I'll be right back. Okay, I didn't put them down. I kind of just got on my knees and was just like begging them to stop, but it worked. Okay, so okay, anyways, I'm gonna go through things that stood out to me that I wrote down, quoted, and that was in the lore video, and I'll write down some thoughts, or I'll explain my thoughts I wrote down and explained. So the first thing that really stood out to me was in the lore video he said there was no true villain. Yeah, this is precisely accurate. I kind of got this sense from talking to my client. My thoughts on this was there's not actually an evil entity, but there's a misalignment with meaning. So what this means is, as Paul Tillich would explain it, he's a Christian existentialist. As he would explain it is, sin isn't like you're going into hell and you're evil. It's more so the more you sin, the more estranged you are from God. And again, as I say in a lot of my videos, we can define God in different ways. But let's just say very loose definition. Let's say he's ultimate meaning. Let's say he's the ground of being. Whatever you want to say. He's oneness. You're estranging yourself from God as you sin. Carl Jung would propose the more misaligned you are with your own nature, with human nature in particular, the more estranged you are from the nature of being. So now you're seeing in a few ways. Dorman isn't actually an evil entity, but in some way he did something where God is here in a monotheistic sense. God is here, and he is here. He's very estranged. So you could see how generations of people could see him as an evil entity because he's so estranged. This is also similar to like how we could even see like Lucifer, for example, if you want to say like being too intellectual, being cunning, being manipulative. These traits that make you estranged from God in some sense, being materialistic, being conniving. so what is Dorman's sin? I don't know if I wrote it down in my brief notes real quick, but I think Dorman's main sin is not being in alignment with human nature. Now I say this because what Dorman offers is actually an incredible wish that many humans have wished for before, which is to bring back loved ones from the dead. So the Wanderer goes to Dorman to ask him to revive his dead wife, I think it is. That's a very human wish, very, very reasonable. But it's really antithetical to our grief work because it's really a naive wish to control that which you can't control. You're making a deal with love. Love, which is, I don't want to dive too deep into that, but love is mysterious. Love is a powerful, transcendent emotion. And now you have a desire to control it. Now what that does is put you in misalignment with the nature of being, or the ground of being, as Tillich would put it. The more in misalignment you are with that, the less conducive of a meaningful life you will live or cultivate. So I think that's precisely what happens with Dorman, is that he stems from a very soulful human place within us, which is the desire to not have people we love die. But we realize the more we follow that piece of the soul that wants that desire, we've learned the more pain and the more suffering we go through, which is why over time this desire, this non-acceptance of death has dwindled, and we've learned that death is a natural process. We've learned that within the last let's say 12,000 years. I don't know, but we've learned it in recent enough times where it's still a common enough motive in our stories, if that makes sense. But we're still not precisely to that point of acceptance, which is why it's still a powerful piece of the story. Okay, next point. He says Dorman is a casualty of this fear-driven change. Now, if you remember my story, my client, we kind of create this framework where Dorman is safe, right? He's safe because he controls love, which is not literally controllable. What that looks like in terms of narrative therapy. So let's take the story very literally and apply it to his life, to a client's life, for example. What that might mean is that to control love, they avoid it. They simply avoid it. Because if they accept it, if they take that risk, that love might end, which is grief, well then now they're putting themselves at risk for meaning, which is scary but also very worthwhile. But they're putting themselves at risk of being greatly sad and greatly harmed and in so much spiritual torment. So what do you do instead? You play it safe and you try to control it. Dorman is that entity, that spiritual figure within us, the piece of our soul, that wants to avoid or control the uncontrollable, which is a very normal thing for people to want to do. But following it leads to this state of meaninglessness and depression. And that's why he's considered evil, because following that spirit leads to a bad place for our spiritual health. So his stance is safety and sameness. This is the same reason that demons or vampires are immortal in every story. It's very much so the fact that immortality, this desire to control again that which you can't control, is quite literally an estrangement from God. As you could say, if God is, let's just say, a reality of being of our spiritual life, that it cultivates in our death, and then you try to let's say, extend that natural endpoint through some type of, let's say, uh, evil, but more so what I mean is a strange sense. So that could be like by becoming a vampire or becoming an evil entity who becomes powerful enough to control grief and death. Then you make this long term bargain that you have to be safe. You can't take that. You can't cultivate meaning in life because you can't allow it to actually end. You're very much concerned with sameness instead of mystery and beauty. Okay. The next point was theories on the origins of Dorman, especially since there was a shrine of worship. Regardless, people deemed him a danger over generations. He isn't evil, but he's not conducive to human potential. Like how the Bible instead states, love and accept fate, since controlling it is the devil's ideology. We kind of already brushed on that, so I don't think I will say too much more, but I will say our gods are usually, in paganistic times, were projected onto every structure. Every big abyss had a god. Every mountain was some type of entity, some type of deity. So I think that happens in this game. And one thing I'll say is, if our soul is fragmented, and not fragmented in a negative way, but in a way, if you give reverence to all of them, you will live a spiritual life. So this entity at some point was given some type of spiritual transcendent functionality, but through being burned, through the negative aspects of following this god, they learned how bad he was. And come and behold, the monotheistic god replaces him, and he says the antithetical stance from what Dorman says, because what Dorman says is, you love very hard. Let's revive that person you love. That's beautiful. He's not saying something inherently evil, but following that perspective isn't what life is. It's not what life can be. It's impossible. So then you have the antithetical stance in the monotheistic God, which says you have to accept and even love your fate, the amor fati, even love your fate, but also accept love for what it is, which is it's a mystery, and it will end. It inevitably ends. I mean, if you say you follow the Christian narrative, and that's your primary orienting story, which is why, like, Jung, for example, might have been categorized as a Christian in some senses. So inherently that your story ends at death, because Jesus was crucified on the cross, but when he came back spiritually, which means he spiritually transcended. But in terms of physically, he died on the cross. Okay. So in general, what I'm saying is, you learn to accept that life ends, that love ends, but it doesn't end in a way that's spiritual. It transcends that. But when you try to control it, it's like a vestibule of what it is, and the inside of what love could be, which is transcendental. Okay, so next point is I wrote Nimrod, which is Dorman spelled backwards is Nimrod, which is the character in the Bible who builds a Tower of Babel through pride. But I also think what I wrote is that it's not just pride, it's also false worship. Because you usurp God, which is, remember, the ground of being, the very thing to orient yourself around for ultimate meaning. If you usurp him with anything else, say you usurp him with the human soul, that's Satanism. Say you usurp him with Dorman, right? Well, that's an obsession with safety and comfort in life. So you can't ever transcend. So if you usurp God with anything other than God, you're going to fall extremely short of meaning, of living a life that is both true in terms of what life entails, which is suffering, but also meaning through suffering, and also love. You fall short of all these fantastic markers of a successful spiritual life. And that's why I said he's not just pride, he's false worship. It's about usurping him with something other than God. And again, you can define God how you wish, but I think it's important to define that. Okay. I wrote that the boy suffering with grief, the wanderer. I wrote he had partook in a Faustian bargain, which is he made a deal with Faust, with the devil character, with Dorman. He made a deal with that character in order to alleviate his suffering on Earth. But what he has to sacrifice is his spiritual eternity in the afterlife, which is his transcendence. So what Faust does is he pursues like a lot of hedonistic, materialistic endeavors in place of spiritual transcendence, which is symbolically already speaking for itself why that would be a bad deal to make. But what the boy does is a little different, is a lot more understandable. He's grieving and he wants to just bring that person back. He's willing to sacrifice himself, and that's why it's a good story, is because it's reasonable, but it's almost too safe. Okay. The last thing I want to mention is just the Colossi in general, because I thought they were just fascinating. So I try to make sense of them. It took me a second, but so once I said this earlier, is people once projected divinity onto every structure in nature. Poseidon's a good example as well. So like, the ocean is mysterious, it's vast, it's unbelievably great breeding ground for our unconscious beings, just like space is. So that's why you have the Sea of Monsters, for example, Poseidon. Great projective potential in that which we don't know. Okay, so especially in paganistic times, like Greek mythology, this is more commonplace, by the way. But I mean, it's so relevant today as well, because now those projections, those pieces of our soul are just inside, and we have to take more reverence to learn them. And that's what we do through learning stories and taking them seriously. Okay. So when the Colossi get fused with Dorman, they are now more dull, as they are controlled and safe. So they almost inherited the spirit of Dorman. They almost inherit that and become safer. Instead of these mystical, beautiful beings out in nature, now they're dull. Okay. The world lost its imagination and soul. Now, this is fascinating tying to Carl Jung. So the exact process Carl Jung described, moving from polytheism to monotheism, as I've already explained. So that's what happened. He says, we've rescinded our projections and the world has become dull. So monotheism is a lot more dull than polytheism because our soul isn't projected onto everything. So in some ways, the consciousness revolution, it hasn't been so beautiful or so helpful spiritually. Okay, so the boy, the wanderer, killing them is the lack of reverence for what they symbolize, which is why their death is conflicting and slowly kills their wanderer. So you could look at this again. We want to look at things mythopoetically. So we make myths of stories. So if you look at this in terms of a myth, he's killing these gods who are perfectly innocent and very necessary. And as I said, they represent pieces of our soul that ought to be given reverence. So what happens then if you give reverence to one deity, one entity, who is not the best one to follow, I don't want to say evil, but estranged. You give all your reverence to that one, and you necessarily kill off the other ones who have more reverence for what life actually is. What happens? Well, of course, it's slowly going to kill him, because all of his soul is now tied up into one piece, one deity. Slowly going to kill the wanderer. It slowly kills the world. It becomes less beautiful, less imaginative, which is what happens in real life in a collective sense. So this game is very deep in terms of merging this personal and collective, unconscious, and even the zeitgeist of moving from reverence for the world to quite literally trying to be safe, and that's causing a lot of disorders. So that was fascinating as well. And I think that might be where we end it. The ending of the game, so this is spoilers, but like so yeah, he kills the Colossi, and the world becomes dull, it's a conflicting death because he's losing a part of his own soul, and he's putting dormant in place of God, which is God. God in this sense, in a monotheistic sense, would be the collective of all those polytheistic deities combined would be the monotheistic God. He's killing most of it and pursuing the one that keeps him safe. Okay, so at the end, Dorman does save the wife and the horse, and he becomes a baby. Well, he becomes dormant first and becomes a baby after. So obviously he was possessed by the spirit of Dorman, which is, again, the spirit to have safety and to not pursue meaning through suffering, but to eliminate suffering. And you can't eliminate suffering, or else there can't be meaning. But then he's born anew instead of dying. I thought that was an interesting decision. I don't know if I've made too much sense of that, but I think it's interesting. I think if you looked at it in terms of like a Jung has this book called like the Axion or Axion. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like Axion. But there's like a circle of growth. Now, and there's an equation. The equation is very interesting but complex. But essentially, it's an equation of wholeness. Maybe this process of going to Dorman, becoming Dorman, kind of created this sense of actual, like a reawakening, like some type of new vitality in life, where now he's wise to the fact that he has to lose and sacrifice and he has to let things go because he felt the antithesis, he felt the negative effects of trying to control and be safe and everything. But that's probably up for a lot of interpretation. So that's gonna be the video. Subscribe or whatnot if you wanna. Besides that, man, I'll probably make a video in another 3 months.